But the last two generations seem to have crossed.
I meant coming to David.
Celsius, but I'd rather do it Kelvin.
It's good to feed him.
Well,
I'm sorry,
absolutely.
I'm glad, I mean, here, I'm sorry, I'm glad I didn't drag you off to the final solution. meeting.
Celsius, I have a hard time.
Final solution.
Mm.
So,
thinking about
we're there, huh?
Celsius.
Is it go on the L?
They're doing,
37.
So Gail, I think you were going really out on a limb there.
What
You
was
said
it?
we
Because,
could have over 200
Oh.
You know, I was really worried that we were going to miss that. I mean, that's fireworks on this is for people out of the
It's
building.
funny. Certainly see that in people.
If we ever hit that threshold as part of this process, I would be overjoyed.
I know.
If government agencies,
Something
at
that's
some
more.
point, this will need to be shared with the public.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so it might be good to have.
Right. Well, I don't know that we're going to get many more people, so I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we'll probably be able to get out of here a little bit early today. So, first of all, my name's Gail Henriksen. I'm the Community Development Director, and I'm pretty sure everybody knows this, but we are live streaming, so for people who may not know who I am, we are conducting a series of workshops with, in conjunction with the Comprehensive Plan Update, and we're starting our discussions of Goal 5, which includes historic resource preservation, open space, scenic spaces, watersheds, wildlife habitats, and a variety of other topics that didn't fit conveniently in one of the other 17 goals. So today we're here to talk about historic resource protection. We were originally scheduled to have Robert Olgwin from the state come and talk to us because of Governor Brown's directive. He is on lockdown. I have his presentation and his slides, though, and you do have copies of that. We also have Mac Burns from the Clatsop County Historical Society and Rachel Jensen from the Lower Columbia Preservation Society. And just a couple of housekeeping things. Restrooms are in the back, men's are on the right, ladies are on the left. There's a water cooler back there and you can fill up water bottles. We have plenty of handouts, so if you know people who couldn't be here today, please take copies for them. We are live streaming and recording it, and I'll send out a link to that later this afternoon. And we do have plenty of coffee and food, so please help yourself. And when you leave, please take food with you. So, seriously. On that note, then, I would like to turn it over to Mac Burns.
Clicker. Good morning, my name is Mac Burns. I'm the Executive Director of the Clatsop County Historical Society. And usually my voice carries really well and I always reject the microphone, but because we're live streaming, so it's a little weird for me to have both hands filled, so I might be a little off. I'm sorry, I apologize. The Historical Society, we operate, of course, 4 museums: the Captain George Flavelle House, the Oregon Film Museum, the Heritage Museum in the old Astoria City Hall, and the Uppertown Firefighters Museum. Even though you hear the word Clatsop County, we are not a government agency. We are a separate nonprofit organization that's been around since perhaps the 1890s, perhaps the 1920s, but definitely by the 1940s we exist. There's different groups that call themselves the Clatsop County Historical Society, so we're not quite sure which one still gave birth to the one that exists today. So I always give those 3. So I want to begin this morning by playing a little game, so play along with me if you will. Where am I visiting? Because I want to get outside of the Victorian Museum, Victorian House Museum box for just a minute. So I'm visiting the most populated area in Clatsop County. It's a beautiful country setting. Any ideas where we are? That's a very good question. He asked, how do we define populated? So you might be on to me here. There's a charming outdoor sculpture garden. It has lakeside views. The lawns are well maintained and people die for this kind of real estate. Oop. Of course, I'm talking about Ocean View Cemetery. And I lead off with that because I love cemeteries. And I think they're incredible resources, and I think all too often we tend to forget them. Once upon a time, Cemeteries were places that people went on family picnics. That's why they have gardens, why they have lawns and beautiful views frequently. They were not a scary place. It was a place to go visit relatives and remember them. And somehow along the line, we've turned them into places that we go to bury our loved ones, and then maybe we go back every now and then to put some flowers. But it's not a place that we encourage kids and families, and I'd like to change that, because I defy you to run across that tombstone and not want to know more about that guy. Tell me you're not interested to know more about somebody who the only thing they put on their headstone is bear hunter extraordinaire. I want to know more about that guy. So the Historical Society does a program many of you probably know about. It's called Talking Tombstones, where we bring characters to life. We put them in costume, they stand above those gravestones, and they bring that character back to life for 5 or 10 minutes. And we get huge crowds when we do this. We've been doing it last Sunday in October for the past 15 years. Our average attendance, regardless of weather, even if it's pouring rain and it's cold, is about 450 people. We've been to 5 different cemeteries. Though I'll talk about that there are other cemeteries that we should be looking at. We've brought more than 100 individuals back to life to tell their stories, about 75 different actors. And it's not a moneymaker for the Historical Society. I do it because I think it's part of our mission. So there's more to Clatsop County than cool old houses, and this is from the guy that runs the museum in the coolest old house in Clatsop County. But I believe, and I think you're all on that same track with your mission of identifying other really amazing things in the county. It's time to understand this process was done in 1980, and this was the list that the committee came up with of things that were significant culturally or historically and that should be explored more of. And we would still agree with this list. I think everything on there is extremely important to the history and the cultural makeup of Clatsop County, so I would encourage they all stay on the list. I was asked to talk a little bit about the Clatsop County Historical Society. We are an educational organization dedicated to preserving and presenting the history of Clatsop County and the surrounding area. It is not our mission, nor do we have the resources to go out and save every cool old building or old barn or old grange or anything old in the county. We have a budget of about $600,000 a year and a full-time staff of 6. Our mission is to preserve and present. We tell stories, and sometimes that means we need an old building like the Flavel House. Sometimes it means we need artifacts. We have a huge archives, over 40,000 photographs. We have probably about 200,000 objects in our collection. We preserve those objects, but we do it to tell stories. So we are not a resource that could go out and research 500 things that might be significant, but we can help you research. We may already have some information on it, but we do not have the resources to go out into every corner of Clatsop County and walk on private property and talk to people. We can help. So you might have the big giant list. If not, we put together a giant list that's on the middle of the table over there. We were tasked to come up with items that we think should be added to a list of potentially significant items. And I went to my go-to people, and I think it's kind of important that you know who these people are, because it kind of explains why I gave you 15 sheets filled with tons of stuff, and sometimes there's a little bit of an overlap. The first stop is Lisa Penner, and I hope that you all know that name. She's our longtime archivist at the Historical Society. She is the most knowledgeable person about Clatsop County that has ever lived and ever will live, and we keep hoping Bill Gates will invent something that we can just poke into our brain and download everything. She's an amazing resource, and if you've ever asked Lisa a question, there is no short answer. You will learn everything. Like if you go in and say, tell me about this house, you're going to learn about every family who ever lived there, every scandal with that family, all the divorces, all the jobs that those people have, and you're just going to get this amazing 30-minute answer that's beautiful and wonderful. We went to John Grimberger. He's a longtime volunteer. He's also the Astoria city historian. He's writing a book right now, so we see him a lot in our archives. So since we saw him, I said, hey, John, how would you answer this question? So we got a list from John. Jim Alberg is an author. He's retired, but he's written 2 books about, one about Westport, the definitive history of Westport, and another one on the company towns of Clatsop County. He's into logging, and he's a direct descendant of Captain West, who started the town of Westport, so that's his interest there. So his list is kind of short, and it focuses on Westport. Sheila Nolan is just an amazing volunteer researcher that has been tasked with a lot of things at the Historical Society for working on a specific project. We frequently say, hey Sheila, would you spend a month working on this for us? And she gave a really amazing list as well. Some volunteers, and then when we started this, when this was first asked of us, we actually found a really neat brochure, and I'll pass this around. I do need it back though, because I stole it from our archives, and my curator would be mad I'm not wearing white gloves. But we kind of think that this was an early predecessor to what you're doing right now. It appears to have been made by Clatsop County and distributed, but it's a pretty amazing list. It does include the cities, so it's not quite specific to just things that are outside of the cities. So you've got really combined lists there, and I began to try and combine them, but I realized that because we didn't get really specific with all of those entities, all those people, they kind of answered this question of what's historically significant, what's culturally significant in a lot of different ways, and I was having trouble trying to combine them. It was very obvious there were different authors, so rather than try and have something mixed together that was going to be obvious to you that it was written by 5 different people, I went ahead and just put them all together. So you might see things duplicated on that list when you go through it. But when you look through it, you will see some common themes. There are a lot of cemeteries on that list, and probably a lot that you've never heard of. There's a lot of lost towns, again, things I never heard of. Natural resources came up a lot, Native American came up a lot of specific historic structures, and then specific people that did something that we think were kind of neat or significant, a house that they lived in or a business they owned, so things that are specific to a person. I want to dive down a little bit on a couple of these. Cemeteries, because at the very beginning you heard me say how much I love cemeteries. I think these are incredibly important, and there are a lot that are on private property. They're small, family-owned cemetery plots. Greenwood's probably the biggest significant one that's privately owned. We've done our talking tombstones there 3 or 4 times. It's actually my favorite cemetery in the county. It's just an incredible place, and I think each one of these, and I didn't even write them all down from our big list, they all have incredible stories to tell, and we should be documenting them. We should be trying to preserve them, especially ones that are on private property, and that's a tough thing to do, is to figure out how to get that private landowner to make sure that they don't bulldoze over it or dig them up and move them somewhere else. Natural resources I'm particularly excited about as well. The Heritage Museum, we just spent 1.5 years and about $20,000 creating a new permanent exhibit about natural resources. So it's something that we feel very strongly about. And part of the mission in that exhibit, and something I'd encourage you here today, is there's more to natural resources in Clatsop County than logging and fishing. Obviously, they're the 2 biggest economic drivers for natural resources, but there are lots of other things that Clatsop Countyans, if that's a word, have tried to make money with our natural resources in a lot of different ways over the past 200 years, and it's kind of amazing the things that people tried. You've got agriculture, all kinds of different things there. Natural gas. Northwest Natural started here because there are rich natural gas deposits. Across the river, it's not on the list, but across the river, there were oil wells. People were trying, they found small supplies of oil, and they were trying to make money with oil. Gold and silver, you usually don't hear about that or think about that in terms of Clatsop County. And if you go see our exhibit, the list is probably 5 times as long as this, and there's things that are going to make you scratch your head and go, whoa, I didn't know that. So I want to show one other thing as an example. Does anybody know what this is? It's not a great picture of it, but does anybody know where that is? That is the flagpole that was at the site of Fort Clatsop in 1928. And I want to talk a little bit about Fort Clatsop. It's obviously not something that we as a group needs to worry about. The National Park Service is taking perfectly good care of it and really doesn't need our help too much. But the time frame and the development of Fort Clatsop, I think, is kind of relevant to what we're doing here. 1899, nobody knew where Fort Clatsop exactly was. And a writer and 5 locals, including Silas Smith, who's a direct descendant of Chief Concomly, went out and located it and said, this is the site. This is where Fort Clatsop was. Even though there was a writer in that group, they didn't take any notes. And they didn't write anything down. And they dispersed, so they had to do it again a year later. And this time the Oregon Historical Society came and helped document where it was. And Silas Smith was part of that group once again. So you see, 1900, it's been identified. It's not until 1912 they do anything with that information. And that's when a bronze marker is placed there. And that's all they do. So 12 years between identifying this is significant, this is important, both locally and nationally. This is an important site, and it's 12 years before they do anything. And in 1928, they add to that a flagpole. And that's all that's happened in 28 years. And in 1953, the Oregonian writes an editorial, and the key word and phrasing I like is the deplorable condition of the site. And that's only 2 years before what's going to happen, Jan. You're getting nightmares, aren't you? The 150th anniversary of Lewis and Clark, and the Oregonian is basically chiding the locals that you've let this place totally fall apart. And it's not until that editorial that locals get together, the junior JCs and a couple of other organizations, and then pretty much everybody in town helps to, let's rebuild the fort. And of course, they built a wonderful reproduction of the fort that we love so much. We burned it down in 2005, right before hundreds of thousands of visitors were going to come see it. 2 weeks before. And then the other part of this component that I really like, that I think is relevant again, the land. It wasn't just there. They had to get land donated by the Oregon Historical Society. Clatsop County owns some of the land. The Clatsop County Historical Society owns some of the land. Crown Zellerbach. And then they purchased. So again, it's 50 years before anything of any significance happens, but somebody took the time to identify this is significant, this is important. And there were a lot of different landowners, private, some public, but they still move forward. This is significant, and someday perhaps we should do something with it. I'll leave you with one last thought. I love this Greek proverb. A civilization flourishes when people plant trees under which they will never sit. Do I have a pointer on this thing?
It's a very poor pointer.
Yeah. So I want to draw your attention. This picture is the Flavel House, obviously. It's about 1898. 1890s. And you see the 3 ladies kind of right in front of the tower. You see the big tree, but if you look over to the right, you'll see a little bit of a sidewalk. If you look to the far right on that picture, there's a little bush. It looks like a little bush, right? The Greek proverb again, when people plant trees under which they will never sit. That's that little bush today. The Flavels never sat under that little tree, never had a picnic, and we have a picnic table there now, and visitors all the time take their pictures with that tree because somebody thought 150 years ago, 130 years ago to plant a tree. And I don't know the full breadth of your mission, but as I'm to understand it, identifying some things that we as a county think are significant and important, and that's not to say right now they have to be saved, but identifying them as that first step to planting a tree that might make something really, really wonderful, like the tree or like Fort Clatsop in 20 years, 50 years, we don't know, but identifying is the important thing. We've thrown a lot of spaghetti at the wall on our list, but they were things that my team thought were potentially really important and really significant. So that's all I got. Thanks.
So you're gonna give us a chance to ask questions?
Sure, I can do the best I can to answer.
I guess they're on the list, the Westport tunnel.
Yes.
Whereabouts is that located? I didn't think they would be in East
It,
Oregon.
it is caved in, but you can get you might be walking on private property, so I might have committed a crime, and I'm sorry. I'm looking at the camera, so if you, what?
We're live.
The sirens are going to start calling. I don't know who owns the property, but it's actually visible if you pull off at the gas station right there in Westport when you get there. And let's say your back is to the highway and you're looking at the gas station, the convenience store. It's kind of over to the left, and there's a road that kind of loops around. I think it's called Hungry Hollow Road or something like that. If you walk to the beginning of that road, you'll see some woods over there, and the hill kind of goes up. Depending on time of year, you can either see the entrance to the tunnel, or you kind of have to walk through some thick underbrush and then push things away and you can see it. It was designed for oxen to pull the trees through to get it to the yard from the other side of the hill, rather than trying to go up and over a hill. They dug this tunnel through, and Jim Alberg would know this better, and he's going to scold me if I get it wrong, but it was the first tunnel designed for oxen to pull trees through in the nation.
So it was part of the logging industry?
Yes.
Construction, not
Yeah.
part of the highway or?
No, but it's strictly for the mill and for oxen and lumber.
Cool, thank you.
I've been there and I didn't know what it was. What?
You know, I didn't know much about Westport until the book project that Jim had, and the Historical Society officially published it. And when he first brought it up, I mean, I said, well, is there enough there about Westport? And the more I learned about Westport and this book that he wrote is just amazing. It was a huge industrial town. They had 3 shifts. That mill never stopped. And they were shipping lumber around the world. And then many of you might recall, not that you were there, don't read me wrong, that the old Ironsides, the Uss Constitution, actually sailed here in 1937, 33, somewhere in that range, in the 30s. And they came here because the main mast had been made at the Westport Mill, because it was the only one that could make something long enough in one piece. And the name of his book is subtitled Home of the Big Sticks, because it really was. And they came as a thank you, sort of, hey, thanks for making that mast for us. And that was the only reason the Constitution came here.
In scanning the list, I just noticed that it's really what I would perceive as North County centric. So I just wonder if that's because there's nothing.
There's nothing in South County. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You know, that is.
All of your team is up here.
You know, that is part of it. There is a Seaside Historical Society and a Cannon Beach Historical Museum that do great jobs. And you know, I've been director of the Clatsop County Historical Society for almost 17 years, and I posed the question in my very first newsletter a month after I got here. I said, are we really the Clatsop County Historical Society, or are we the Astoria Historical Society? And I got exactly from 1,000 members 2 responses to that column. One said, certainly you're being facetious, and you don't really mean maybe you are just the Astoria Historical Society. Another said, good on you, shake things up. We collect all of the county. We do. I mean, if you look in our collections and our archives, we do have a lot of stuff on Seaside, Cannon Beach, Arch Cape. I mean, we've got a lot of throughout the county. We don't have as much as I would like. And those 2 organizations do have things. There is some duplication of things that are in our collections that they have as well. So it's not necessarily the people. It's a little bit of just our collection isn't deep enough. And I would love for it to be deeper. We always are looking for more information out there. But we don't have as much as we do on the North County.
Peter Lindsay has written some historical events coming down in the Arch Cave and in that area. So I think
Yeah.
it's a good resource for Peter was born there.
Great, yeah.
He's written a couple of books that
Okay.
have got some good historical
Uh-huh.
information.
Wonderful. You've been patient.
The list all seem to be about stuff, which to me throws a huge void about attitudes, social sciences. You know, things that really make this area, for good and bad, what it is. Especially with our short view of history.
Yes. I think, and I'm not going to have the perfect answer to that, because I don't have a perfect answer, but I would say that I think there are a lot of things on the list, not 50%, I mean, it's a low percentage, but I think there are a lot of things there that if you dive down into the specific history, those kinds of themes would come out, that these are more about social happenings and how one culture versus another culture, how they're interacting. I think they would address some of those things. I don't know that we put, hey, the Chinese on the list, but if you pick some specific locations, the Chinese and how they were treated would be a part of that story.
No shit.
So that's kind of the best answer I can give. I mean, I don't think we specifically said those things, but I think if you research some of those, that some of those would come out. Maybe not enough.
I hope that there is a list as great that starts with a fresh orientation.
Mm-hmm.
Coming in with our manifest destiny view of the area.
Yeah.
That's here for the plucking.
Yep.
Not long ago, you can remember a Napa High kid who said, "We have so many trees, it's impossible we'll ever grow them." There's just a lot of attitude.
Yep. There's a story that has resonated with me that's an oral tradition, but supposedly when the Astor party got here, Chief Conley came around and said, I was here with Lewis and Clark. I was good friends with them. And in fact, they left me something. And the story goes, and it's an oral tradition, so I can't say 100%, this is 100% true. But he brought back, Lewis and Clark had left a written list of the party, and hey, we made it, we got it here. And the idea was, in case we don't make it back, maybe you could give this to a ship sometime to at least be able to document we made it this far, we might not have made it back. And somebody in the Astor party said, I'd like to see that. And this is in a rainforest. He had saved a piece of paper for 7, 8 years, and he brought it back. And supposedly the member of the Astor party looked at it and said, this is very interesting, and then threw it in the fire and said, we're in charge now. And that speaks to exactly what you were just saying.
So the program just stay in history.
I'm sorry?
You gotta keep that going.
As long as the radio station wants to have us keep doing it, yeah.
Well, I sure am an advocate for it. I listened intently, I think that's a
My apologies, but thank you.
It's a great program. And
Good.
I think that's a good way to keep the community involved. I think it's something that
Yeah.
it's got more credence than you say.
Good. And that's a good example of what you brought up, sir, is the first year I did those, I got a lot of phone calls from people in Seaside that said, nothing but Astoria, nothing happens this day in history but in Astoria. And we went back and specifically looked through the newspapers for things that were outside of Astoria because of that recognition that, we do tend to too much focus. So there is hopefully a little bit more of a mix of Seaside and even across the river and other places, but thank you. Yes, sir.
That was a great segue, because you could put Elsie and Jewel in there.
Yep. Yes.
And how, on that part, does Elsie and Jewel have a historical society?
Ooh. I don't know that they do. Yeah, there are little pockets of people that do historical things. The Brownsmead Grange has a committee that does history. So I don't know on that one. That's a very good question, and I should know, and I don't.
How would you be able to start? Who would I contact?
We can chat, and then we can try and figure out who we know out there, and then try and figure out who has some good local history, and we could go from there. But, yeah, and that's one of the things, just, again, back to the Clatsop County Historical Society, we've tried to be supportive of groups like that in Seaside and Cannon Beach. Cannon Beach has a paid staff, Seaside does not, and we've tried to help them where we could. And we've looked for partnership opportunities where I don't want to step on toes, but like our Talking Tombstones, Seaside said, we have a great graveyard cemetery down here. And 3 years ago, we took the Talking Tombstones to there. And it was a wonderful partnership. And they may continue a version of it on their own. They may go back and work together again. So we're always looking for those opportunities. And if there's some folks there we can talk to and see about helping to tell their story or telling their story in the Heritage Museum somehow, I mean, I'd love to have that conversation.
What's the cemetery out around Red Bluff?
That I don't know. I'd have to ask Lisa.
County out 26.
Yeah,
Great little cemetery.
yeah.
I have two questions.
Sure.
So the first question is there any particular historic resource in the county right now that you feel is in imminent danger and that we should really be paying attention to?
I think everything's in danger at any given time. You know, from different causes. You know, a good earthquake in the Flavel House is in huge danger. The Flavel House is in huge danger of fire. So I think there's a lot of different ways to answer that, and I can't pick one specific one. I mean, I know you'd love to, like the National Historic Trust has their most endangered things, and I'm not really prepared to do that. I think there are things that are in danger of being forgotten. I think there are things in danger of there's not a group that knows how to tell that story or how to preserve that story. I think there are things that are on private property that it's my property and don't tell me what to do with my property and I'll tear that barn down. I don't care. And you know, there's just a lot of different ways to answer that question.
Okay. So my second question is, in the comprehensive plan, we not only identify resources that should be focused on, but we create policies of steps that the county should take to reach preservation nirvana. So if you were to give the county some recommendations about policies that we might want to implement to help promote historic preservation, do you have anything you would recommend?
It sounds like it's time for Rachel. Yeah, I don't want to rain on her parade. I think education is a huge part of this equation, and just making people aware that hey, this is important, this is significant. You might not be Chinese, but you know they had a huge impact here, and we should tell their story. Or you know, this population we don't think of being here anymore, but they are still here, and maybe we can help tell their story. Or, hey, that old Grange building is really cool, and nobody's taking care of it, and if it's on private property, maybe we can talk to that owner, and what are you doing, and maybe there's some avenues that the county can help, or an organization can help. So I think the biggest thing is information and just making people aware, because they may not be aware of the story that's in their backyard. And once somebody gets to know that history, they tend to care a little bit more about it. So that would be my biggest thing, is education.
Would you think that we should legislate towards that?
This is going to sound weird coming from me. I'm a big private property rights guy. And if you own something and you want to be a jerk and destroy it, but the wonderful thing about living here is I can call you a jerk for destroying it. I think you can chide, you can goad, you can push, you can carrot and stick. I think there's a lot of things that can be happened, but at the end of the day, if it is on private property, unless there are some federal laws or state laws already in place, then I think there's only so much government can do.
What I'm saying is, you kind of make it a mandatory decision, however, it should be written in such a way that it encourages preservation.
If there could be benefits, like tax benefits, or, yes, I'm a huge,
We encourage it, we don't.
I'm a huge fan of that make the person want to do it. Because when my son was 6 years old and I say, make your bed, now I'm a dictator and, he's going to do the worst possible job. But if I tell him, hey, there's a great reward for this, then he tends to do a better job at it. And he's more excited because you're gonna take me somewhere, you're gonna take me to the store, you're gonna give me something. So I just think that encouragement rather than being told to do something. He had to stand up first.
So let me ask kind of a specific question, and that is, if our community, as an example, has an area that used to be an Indian campground, or Indian business there, and that kind of a thing, where do we go for help to get that?
I think once you start talking Native Americans, I think right off the bat, you've got the federals involved, and you've got to reach out, even though they're not recognized. It's the human decent thing to do, to reach out to the First Nations that are here, even if the federal government doesn't recognize them. We know these groups were not wiped out. They're our friends, they're our neighbors, we know them, and I think it's the decent thing to do to reach out to them and ask their thoughts. But definitely, once you start talking Native Americans, you've got the federal government instantly involved. And, I mean, if it were suddenly me and it was the backyard of the Flavel house, I'd call the National Park Service and say, what am I supposed to do? I just found this. And assume that they would be able to guide me to the proper channels. And then I'd reach out to the Clatsop-Nahalem and the Chinook and say, hey,
The state office of historic preservation. will
SHPO.
probably help to give advice and that kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
And about grants, possibly, and that kind of thing.
yeah. Now, if you just, I mean, that's kind of an easy one to have asked, because there are so many guidelines, but, you know, hey, I just dug up and I think I found, you know, some Japanese stuff, then to me, it's, you call the Historical Society and we can kind of take a look at it, and we know some archaeologists, and we can call SHPO and some other places and figure out what's best.
A minor one, the Chinook Nation, I think tends to pronounce it Chinook instead of Chinook, just for, what?
I think it's the other way around.
She thinks it's the other way around. I think Jan's wrong again. But the point, is there any little plastic sign that points out the Chinese-built river wall? You know, and I say plastic because I know bronze gets stolen.
Yeah, I don't know that there is. You know, the closest you get is the Garden of Surging Waves.
Yeah.
And it's a story that I have professionally in the last I'm more and more interested in, because I was caught off guard being asked some very specific questions about the Chinese experience here, and I did not have good answers, and I was embarrassed. So we at the Historical Society, and then me personally, we've been making a real focus just to learn more. The best kind of, and this is going to sound funny or strange, the best explanation in full of the chair walls I actually got from taking Jeff Daly's underground tour of Astoria, where you can really see it, and he explains it. He's got some diagrams of it.
What are they talking about the chair walls? But
Yeah, he's talking about the riprap, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you said chair walls.
Dumped in there.
Yeah.
But it was kind of built over at the Maritime Museum.
Yes.
But if you go to the south of there, along there, there's this
Yeah.
nice, smooth,
Yep, yeah,
placed.
yeah. I don't think there is any signage, and I don't know that that's even mentioned in the Maritime Museum or at the Heritage Museum.
It wouldn't be mentioned at the Maritime Museum because they ignored it and
No.
right on top of it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think that is a great example of why I'm excited by what you're doing, is there are a million of these little things like that a sign would be great, and it would do a lot. Or some mention in a context article, or on a map for visitors or something. I mean, there are so many of these little neat stories, and I don't want to history geek out on you here, but I get excited when I hear those things, and we're a big county, and there are a lot of little corners of this county that have amazing stories. I mean, bear hunter extraordinaire. I still want to know more about that guy. We've done a token effort, and we haven't found anything. We're going to keep looking. So,
A lot of
anything?
rock that was used today was ballast that was used.
Mhm.
Things were exported from this area, and the ships went out.
Yeah.
They had to come back It's funny, I had a gentleman who had a place out in Lewis Clark, and I was driving past his place. I said, wow, that rock looks like Screwball Jetty in South Australia. He fell over. I said, that's exactly where that went.
And he knew
Went
that's-
shipment
see.
down to Adelaide in South Australia. And they went to the Screwball Jetty and they brought that ballast up, and it's a unique kind of a rock. And it's still on the wall up there on that private property.
Wow.
So you're right. I mean,
And that's the type of thing that should be documented, because the homeowner knows that, and you know that.
yeah.
But when he sells the house and moves
I did
away,
that 40 years ago, but now the new owner, I bet she doesn't know.
yeah, and that's the type of thing that does need to be documented.
Ask you to drop the mic, because I'm
Okay.
getting text that they can hear the audience better than they can hear you.
Oh,
So-
excellent, excellent. I hate using the mic, I like projecting. So, but that is the perfect example, the two people knew it, and when two people know it, that is a fragile, endangered story.
Yeah.
And somebody's not gonna know it, and 10 years from now, somebody's gonna buy that property, and I don't really like this, and demolish it, and bulldoze it, make it little pebbles, and get rid of it.
Well, they'd have to demolish the house that's built on it.
Oh, but that's the perfect example,
Yeah.
and to document that, you know, whether that's significant enough to be part of this, but it's part of a bigger story that you began with. You talk about ships all over the world are coming here, use rocks as ballast, and then you got the specifics. So there are a lot of different levels to these stories. I always talk about like museum exhibits or history stories are like a swimming pool, and some people just want to dip their toe in. Ships came from all over the world. Some people kind of want to wade in a little bit more. Where were they coming from, and what were they taking out, and what were they delivering, what were they shipping? Some people want to dive in and learn about a single rock. And we need to be able to, as storytellers, whether it's museums, whether it's authors, writers, whether it's this portion of the county's responsibility, we've got to recognize that there are those three levels. And we need to be able to adapt and tell that full story, or just give the little overview.
Okay, are there any
How's
other
membership?
questions for Matt?
Sorry? How's membership in your society? Is it declining, increasing, or people dying?
Yes, yes, and yes. Our membership has, in my time, it's gone up, it's gone down. We're kind of right in the middle right now of my time here. The real nice thing, we were behind on our come tucks for a while, and a lot of members let us know that, and we did lose some members, and we promised everybody, you know, hey, you're gonna get 4 issues, and we're not gonna drop you as a member if you don't renew until you get your 4 issues. And as we've got caught back up, a lot of people have raised their membership levels, and some folks that dropped out for a couple of years have come back, so that's been nice, and it kind of shows how important Comtux is as a resource. Our attendance has been fantastic. I'm a little nervous what's going to be happening over the next few months, but we have been experiencing at all of our museums double-digit increases for the past 4 years. The Oregon Film Museum is setting the pace. It now outdraws the Flavelle House, which has always historically been our flagship, but from a straight-up attendance-wise, it's now the Oregon Film Museum. But last year, we welcomed and entertained and educated 85,000 visitors. So it's been kind of a staggering growth for us as an organization.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for what you do, I think it's very beneficial to the county.
And thank you for all what you're doing.
Yeah, and we're gonna let Matt go, he's going to Portland to pick up his parents.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, I'll make sure everybody knows that. My elderly parents, 91-year-old dad, and 81-year-old mother, decided now is a good time. So how about I come here? I said, really? Have you been watching the news? But they like coming here, so they're.
I'll be the only one on the phone.
Yeah, my mother said, maybe we'll get quarantined there, and I was silent. And she said, you probably wouldn't like that, but we'd love it. So, well, I'm gonna hang around for a little bit longer, I've got some time before I need to leave. But, I'm happy to talk with any of you one-on-one at any given time, just give me a call. This is the fun part of my job, it's not membership personnel issues or fundraising, so, yes.
I kind of have a curiosity as to how many old sites that were developed to help maintain history locally that aren't taken care of after they've been placed. I'm involved with a community that, in the last 25 years, went through the process of planting trees out at the fairgrounds. And that process was fairly long to get the approval, first of all, to plant them at the fairgrounds, and to decide on what trees would be appropriate. It was a drawn-out process. And once those trees were planted at the fairgrounds, they were completely ignored. And at this point, there is not a sign of any of the four of them. They weren't taken care of. They were basically mowed down within the first few years. How much of that do you think has occurred in the past?
I think it happens far more often than you would think and that you would like. And that's one of the great dilemmas that can happen for any kind of nonprofit cause, but I can really only speak to museums and history. People get excited and let's save that old cabin, let's save that old house, that old barn. And, a group of very caring volunteers get it together, they raise some money, and they put a lot of sweat equity, a lot of weekends of elbow grease, and they'll restore it. And there's not been that sustainability question or thought put into it. And then you get excited to get the project, and then you finish the project. We got it open, and we're showing it to the visitors on Saturdays. And then, well, I worked really hard for 5 years or 10 years on that project, and then I'm kind of tired. And they've all stepped back. And without that sustainability of who is going to take care of this, a lot of times, and it's no fault, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, because the Flavel House was saved in 1948 from demolition, and it was all volunteers until 1980. There was not a paid staff person until 1980, and they did an amazing job keeping that place from the wrecking ball, keeping it open, keeping it vibrant, keeping it excitement. And that's an amazing thing that doesn't happen a lot. So it probably happens more often that a group will save something, and then, well, who can we give it to? What do we do with it? And the same thing actually happened with Fort Clatsop. There were a lot of different partners, as you saw in that. The junior JCs were the ones that really did the sweat equity and the recruiting of church groups and other social groups. Let's go out there and hew these logs and put them together. The business part all ran through the Historical Society, at least according to my minutes from that time period. And then when it was all done, there was this, what do we do with it? And well, who's going to be responsible for it? And what happens if somebody gets hurt out there? And there was this kind of huge debate over about a 9-month period, that I can tell from my minutes, of conversations with the Oregon Historical Society. Do you guys want it? And the Clatsop County Historical Society said, well, we could probably hire a kid to be out there, like a Foster, to work it and sell some postcards and unlock the door, but we don't want the liability. What if somebody gets hurt on those sharp, pointy things? And there's this huge discussion. And there's a little bit of we own it, you own it, we don't want to own it, will you own it? And finally, there's kind of a group meeting where they say, let's call the National Park Service, maybe they'll want it. And thankfully, the National Park Service said, yes, we would like that. And they have the resources, they've got the skill set. And even after that decision, which was kind of universally like, okay, that makes the most sense, there was still this letdown. I helped build that, and now I have no control over it. I have no say over it. How long could that volunteer group have sustained it? And could they have taken it to the level that the feds took it to? Probably not. So I don't know. Long rambling answer. I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer.
We're going to take one more question because we got Rachel's waiting as well to talk. So I'm going to go to Dave.
I'm one of the processes of one of the branches in the county. You got to apply it. My branch is in very good shape. It's the first one, the oldest one, in Tel Branch. We do have a daycare center here now that's providing some income to keep it up. But is there any thought about getting some help to preserve some of these how does it fit? We had a big to-do about when the daycare center moved in. It wasn't zoned for that use. And so we went through a lot of expense, maybe $50,000 to get it up to a code where it would be allowed to have a daycare center in it. And I don't know if there's been any thought among the people who are doing this operation about looking at the codes for the ranges, which are eventually going to, I think, evolve to a preservation type setup.
My organization, my staff and some volunteers, we've actually been talking about the ranges recently. I don't know why they don't hold up, but they have. Financially, we have no ability to help. We aren't in the granting business. We don't have the funds to do that. I think there are other organizations that could help point you in the right direction, like Rachel's, possibly SHPO, and some other places. Our role that I would see, and the role that we've been talking about, is, hey, could we do an exhibit to draw some attention to these? We used to do historic home tours every August, and we dropped them 5 or 6 years ago. Would it be cool, and would people go to all the ranges that still exist in Clatsop County on some Saturday? Could we arrange that as an awareness thing, and give you the opportunity to tell your story to 50, 100, 200 people that would show up?
Do you provide some help to get us into a historic building designation or something like that? Is there one?
For the county,
Well, let's get it with the state.
Yeah.
That doesn't know how to do that.
I hate to keep throwing Rachel under the bus. That'd be a Rachel question. That's not a historical.
So.
All right.
we
Well,
have
thank
Matt
you.
weighed in, then let's bring
Yeah.
Rachel up. And thank you to Matt.
Okay, I'm glad we're not using the microphone. And I love the questions you've asked so far, and great discussions, and a lot of things that I'm going to talk about, touch on those things that you've brought up already. I'm Rachel Jensen from the Lower Columbia Preservation Society, and we've been around for a little over 20 years. Our focus is the Lower Columbia region, and so that includes Washington and Oregon around the mouth of the Columbia River. So I don't have a huge in-depth knowledge of South County and those sorts of things, but there's lots of resources available for us to find more information out about those things. All right, so basically, our mission is to preserve historic structures and sites in our areas, and so kind of what we've looked at when we were talking about this program was really structures, because there are examples of things that are there. The list that Matt gave you and all the archival lists from the Historical Society are great. We concur. Those are all excellent things to be looked into further. These are the ones that are mentioned currently in the county comp plan, and so there are some specific mentions in the plan.
Rachel, you're going to need to talk louder. People on the live stream can't hear you.
Sorry. Okay. So these are the specific resources that are already mentioned in the current comp plan, and they were also in the list. But one of the things the comp plan says is that the Citizen Advisory Committee is the ones who are tasked with identifying this list. And as you've seen, it's a huge list of things. So do we have the adequate information necessary to compile the list? That's a real good question. So we have maps. We have these lists that Max provided. We have inventory sheets from SHPO. There's an Oregon Historic Sites database. There are resources that have come across the state's table because of, say, a highway project or something. So some resources have inadvertently been looked at and decided that they're contributing. So there's some additional information on specific sites that's available. There are National Register nominations for the few properties in the unincorporated areas that are on the National Register of Historic Places.
I'm going to ask you, Rachel, so people can hear you out online. If you want to really be heard,
Okay.
flip the mics over.
All right, thank you. So there's the National Register nominations, there's things that we can find on the Oregon Historic Sites database, and there are inventory sheets from past state inventories. And there's also, additional information and anecdotal information. Obviously, we all have stories of, I know someone who, told me once that this happened at the Grange. So those are all sources of information, but it's gathering those together and really having them in a way, in a format that we can find useful and that we can find useful in the future as a historic resource of itself. That's really a goal. So what are we lacking? Really lacking an on-the-ground reconnaissance level survey. So we're lacking people having gone out in our current period of time and looked at what are the existing structures, particularly in like ghost towns. We talk about there's a lot of small towns where there were people who lived, there was housing, there was the mills, there were logging camps. And it's really hard to say for sure what's still there. We have our list from 1976. Some of those refer to things being gone or still having some remains there, but we really don't know. That's, nearing 40 years on some of these things. So the inventories themselves are, they don't have any regulatory effect. And so that's one of the things, like when we're talking Goal 5, it's inventorying shouldn't be scary. Inventorying should be a really positive thing for us, because what inventories do is they create a historic resource for us in the future, because now we have this documentation. We maybe have photographs, we have field notes. So here we've created and documented what we have today, and that will be helpful in the future, regardless of what happens to those resources. So one of the things I think I was reading it's one of the state planning guides, the local government will not have evaluated whether a resource is significant when the inventory is initially developed. That is, the inventory should include those resources that are potentially significant or worthy of protection. So we want to cast a really broad net. We need to be able to look at all of the resources that are out there, and then to determine significance, we really have to provide context. And that's not easy. This isn't something that we can easily do from behind our desks. We can't just use Google Earth and try to figure out, what's still there. That's helpful, but what we really need is professionals to go out and survey these things. And in rural areas, there's some complications because of private property. Here in the cities, when we inventory, we can take photos from those street right-of-ways, so we can pretty much document. There's very few things we don't actually end up being able to access. In rural areas, of course, that's more difficult. Inventory is an ongoing process. It's good to do it as often as we can because things change. And also because we learn more about the significance of things over time. We also have to consider that historical changes in terms of, right now we're looking at, 50 years in the past as becoming historic. Well, when you're inventorying, that's a really long process, and creating ordinances or anything like that that has to do with those inventories, that process is, lengthy. So we're actually looking, when we go out to inventory now, 40 years. So we're talking 1980 that we want to consider structures and sites that are important from 1980. So that's, so as long as we keep ongoing inventorying, we're going to continue to add more things to the list, both because of knowledge that we have about the distant past and also because of things that actually becoming historic that are, like right now particularly, we're seeing a lot of mid-century things that we have to start considering. And again, a great benefit of a survey now is that it is a document itself. It becomes a historic resource. So. So the opportunity to record our history is great. It is a form of preservation. It's an opportunity to go out and connect with those firsthand people in the community who have information. So say you're out doing photography or you're out doing something like that and you run into, someone who is asking, oh, what are you doing? And they say, oh, well, you should talk to so-and-so. Then we can file a list that's actually really beneficial also for things like oral history projects, things like that, because our human resources that have historical knowledge are a diminishing resource as well right now. We need to locate the people in our communities who can tell those stories. And we would recommend that we use a compatible format for any surveys and inventories so that it can be used with the Oregon Historical Site Database, which is available online. It's very easy to use and access, and that is a great source so that researchers, local governments, everyone would be able to pull up all that information. There is a way on those databases to enter information of surveys, so you can enter that information without actually having to identify yet if it's significant. It can be undetermined. So again, it's not regulatory. This can be an information process. So then some of the questions are, and some of them that I would have for SHPO, but they're not here today, but hopefully be able to kind of talk on it as well, is does the county have to inventory their historic resources? And do they want to do that? So these are kind of the purposes that we see as being reasons why we would want to inventory, and that is to promote and encourage preservation, restoration, and adaptive reuse of historic resources. So we got to know what they are before we can promote that. Identify and encourage the inclusion of qualified buildings sites on the National Register, because even if we do not have a local historic preservation ordinance here, we can use some of the base level protections afforded to things on the National Register. We can actively involve the public in historic preservation programs and educate them and give them information. So adding that survey information to things like the state database, it helps everybody be able to use that information for their historic and educational opportunities. We can provide visible recognition of historic structures and sites in the county. That would be markers, tours, things like that. And we can make efforts to relocate historic structures or resources instead of demolition. Sometimes we don't know until it's too late what we are losing. And so if we already have it inventoried and have at least the basic information, it can kind of put that red flag up and say, hey, maybe we need to think about this a little bit more. And so those are our recommendations. And so one of the things I mentioned is encouraging listings on the National Register. And so that's a voluntary process of a property owner who has a historic structure or site. It's a fairly extensive process in terms of the documentation that's required and the historical significance and the context statements and everything. So it usually does actually require professional help. SHPO has services that help provide guidance, but a lot of times people do need the help of a professional architectural historian or historian. So right now there are, I believe, 4 National Register properties with structures on, like significant structures on them in the unincorporated county. There are several more, I think there's at least 6 more National Register inventoried sites that are in the unincorporated Clatsop County, but those are address restricted properties, and that's something that we've talked about here is, do you really want to call attention to specific sites of maybe archaeological importance? Probably not. A lot of times those things, although we want to share the history of them, the actual sites need to be protected by being address restricted. But in terms of properties that are on the National Register, which is a voluntary process again, so the homeowner or the property owner is aware of and has consented to this designation, or they purchased the property and should have theoretically known that was on the National Register when they purchased it. The local government, if they receive a request to demolish or relocate a structure that's on the National Register, they must conduct a public hearing. That doesn't mean that they have to disallow it, or it doesn't tell them how they have to conduct that public hearing, but at least it gives some time for people in the public to express their concerns or perhaps come forward and say, hey, I have a plan, would you consider doing this? And one of the common things that communities do, or city governments do, is that they like put a 120-day delay on a demolition of that sort, just to give the community some time to try to maybe come up with an alternative. And so that's something that is already a base level of protection. It's not something you have to create an additional ordinance for. So we also think that the comp plan should address historic structures that are foreclosed upon by the county. And again, if we have an inventory of them, then we know when they're foreclosed upon that they're significant and that maybe we should address them in a certain way. Maybe, I think the city of Astoria, for instance, has in their comp plan a stipulation that when they have foreclosed properties, they reach out to preservation societies and things to see if if they would like kind of first dibs or something on that so that they could do something with it. Historic structures owned by the county, obviously, should be addressed in the comp plan about what the county does with its historic properties that it owns. And then some sort of dedication to an ongoing inventory process. Again, these are the same sort of areas that Mac discussed. All the like little ghost towns, lost towns, logging camps, all these different areas. But again, these are all out there, and so getting to know who in those little communities want to be involved and can provide those contacts is going to be required, especially if we have to, as a county, hire someone from out of the area to do our inventories for us. It's going to be nice if we can already kind of say, hey, and here's a list of the people we would suggest you talk to in these different areas. We can also identify things by themes. So some of the themes that we're interested in right now are granges, schools, old schoolhouses. There's several out in the country, farms and barns. And I think storefronts is kind of a significant one, especially in our little small towns that may still have a general store. Some of them still have working general stores, and other ones maybe have old stores that have been converted into housing or something like that. So identifying those would be also pretty interesting. And so the challenges are funding these inventories, because it is a costly endeavor. And that's one of the things that perhaps Gail will talk about with becoming a certified local government and ability to get some pass-through funding from the State Historic Preservation Office, which is SHPO. So challenges of finding out-of-area consultants and who potentially we need to hook them up with local organizations and with local people who know the history, but not rely too heavily on the volunteer organizations and volunteers in our community who are already swamped with things. We want to be as helpful as we possibly can, but again, we have all these organizations have small staffs and lots of volunteers, and so we love to be the source of the source and kind of guide people into where they need to look. But the inventory process itself is really beyond the scope of most like voluntary organizations. And again, identifying community members, and then the challenges of rural inventories of having to get on private property. And again, that's going to have to do with that community involvement and reaching out and letting people know what we're doing, and letting them know that it's not regulatory necessarily, that this is, information gathering, and letting them know that there are ways to opt out of designation if we get to that point. So if you guys identify places that are that you want to learn more about in inventory, then you go on to the process of deciding if it's significant. Then it's another process to designate it. And at the point of designation, property owners have a right to say that they do not want to be designated, and that's currently how Oregon law works. So that kind of can ease the way for people to understand, and sometimes in the process they decide, hey, I want to be designated. It's okay to be designated. So just because someone originally is kind of standoffish about it doesn't mean that we can't convert them into preservationists. So the ways that the county can preserve historic resources is document through ongoing inventory processes, designate, encourage additional National Register nominations, educate and incentivize by voluntary means when possible, because that's great. We can set a good example by being good stewards of our own historic properties, and we can evaluate the significance, designate properties, and then adopt a preservation ordinance if so called for. So, thank you. Questions?
You're gonna get this list together by June.
So, on the,
I've got another,
Yeah.
two things that, the Grange buildings are officially owned by the state, Grange. The local Grange has no way to sell the property, do anything with it. So we appreciate you, your organization, getting with the state Grange to find some way to preserve these when membership goes down to a certain level, Grange, state Grange takes over the building.
Okay. Yeah, and we have discussed as a group doing, in the next year, doing a Grange tour. So I will, yeah, sure. Yeah.
so you got one regulation on the books that says it's mandatory for the county to process conditional use permit. Who determines whether that application rises to the necessity of being mandatory?
In terms of National Register properties,
Yeah.
it's just demolition or relocation. It's no longer mandatory for extensive changes or anything. It's just, so if someone's is requesting to demolish or move a historic property that's on the register, then it has to have a public hearing. It has to be on the National Register, and right now, the county has, I think, 4 that are structured, so.
So it's pretty limited.
Yeah, there's really,
For examples.
yeah, there's really not a lot of protection.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of times capturing information in some database. Do you have an URL for us to go
Yeah,
find that thing?
I can provide that for you, yes. It's the Oregon Historical Site Database. It's a historic sites database, and it's on the SHPO site, I believe, has the link to it. And you can sort through by county, you can sort by city, and it will come up with, not everything that shows up is going to be National Register. There's little codes. It takes a little time to get used to because there's codes including National Register individually listed, National Register historic districts, and then there's ones that say UN, which is undetermined, so it's been captured in some way, but they haven't determined whether or not it's historic. And then there's eligible contributing, which is often what you'll see if something has been, again, captured because of some other project, and it's been determined that it is significant, but it's not actually designated as historic. So, and if it's confusing, it is confusing.
I think it would be helpful, for instance, for the Granges, if we could, through some sort of listing of acceptable uses, acceptable public
Absolutely.
uses, like childcare facilities or whatever, for those buildings that have been used as public spaces for and so on, but that maybe, so there might be a path for organizations that didn't cost them quite so much money to get to have a continued use of buildings.
Yeah, so the use is really dictated by what the zoning is on the property. And I don't know the specifics in the case of your Grange. I know that, I think you had to go through a conditional use process to get approval.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why it cost you $15,000. I don't think that was the county's application fee. I think that might have had more to do with building codes and state required for a date period. So that's going to come from the state level.
Yeah.
But each Grange will be unique depending upon its zoning. And all anybody has to do is contact the zoning department and say, hey, I have somebody who's interested in putting a gymnastics school in my Grange. Is it permitted? Then we can figure out how to work with somebody.
I was just wondering if there was a way that we could have something existing in the zoning ordinance that would facilitate keeping this going.
Are you talking about like a special price break or
No, I'm just talking
application
about
fees or?
Permitted uses.
Yeah, permitted uses.
So the permitted uses apply to all properties in a zone. So if we allow it for a Grange, we have to allow it for Bruce's property and your property and my property.
So we'd have to figure out a different So.
We had to create a special range
Special
zone.
range.
And then the problem that you're gonna run into is you're gonna apply it to one building in the middle of an area. And then you're into spot zoning. And we, obviously, spot zoning is something that we cannot do. So,
It's gotta be.
Like I said, it's complicated.
To backtrack, I think Charles, you had a question, but in the packet of information we sent out a few months ago about historic resources as part of your Gold 5 background materials, there is a list of properties that have been inventoried that's on the SHPO website, and a list of properties that are on the National Register within the county. And I highlighted the ones that are actually within the unincorporated areas, and Rachel's right, in the unincorporated areas, it's very few. Most of them are Astoria.
Yes.
That are National Register, and that's because of the historic district. So, but anyway, if you need those resources, again, just let me know and I'll send it back out to you.
So your presentation posed two questions. Does the county have to? Does the county want to? What's the answers?
That's,
See that to give.
that's
I'm
for,
just saying, has there been negotiation? That's what I'm saying. Have we made any insight into answering those two questions?
We're hoping that we're trying to influence you into thinking that you want to.
so the strategic plan that the county adopted in 2012, or I don't know if they adopted it, but that they completed at least in 2012, does list historic preservation as one of the county's prioritized goals. We've not done any work on that to date that I'm aware of. I know since I've been here for 2 years, we haven't. It is a personal passion of mine, so this is my little pet project that I would like to take on. But part of it's going to come out of this comp plan update. And so working through our committees, the planning commission, the board of commissioners, and making sure we get public input, those are really the individuals and the groups who are going to make that determination, want or need. So it's not just a matter of negotiating and saying, this is what we're going to do. It's really, what does the community want? If the community values its historic resources, then yes, they'll push for that. If they really have no value because we haven't educated enough, then, that's a bad thing on our part, perhaps. So.
And I'm not really familiar with the comprehensive plan procedures, but is it possible that maybe you don't have to, at this step, identify these 20 items, these 10 places, these 50, but maybe it's really your goal is to do an inventory and decide what should be on that list, and maybe that's the actual goal, and then the next time that the comprehensive plan is updated, you actually have the inventory, and you can have all the necessary tools to say, this one's endangered more than the others, and this is a more significant story that's not being told anywhere else, and we really should focus on this site or this building. I mean, is that a logical step that dovetails with your requirements for the comprehensive plan?
Yes, absolutely. That could be our big policy with regard to historic preservation, is conduct an inventory, put a time frame on it. Within 5 years, the county should. And then from there, we can amend the comprehensive plan anytime. So from that point on, we can be amending it constantly as we identify resources or want to put more teeth into something. We have that ability. But it's just getting to that first step of saying we're going to make a commitment to do this is really what I think we're looking at.
You mentioned it was a prioritized goal. You happen to recall what was just higher and just lower priorities relative to that prioritized?
I think one of them was updating the comprehensive plan. I off the top of my head, Robert, I don't remember, but I do know updating the comp plan and historic preservation, and there were several others. And it's
Yeah,
right
it's not
across.
on the list, but yeah, those prioritized goals were prioritized, as I recall.
Yes.
And they give some sense of who cares.
Well, the plan now is 8 years old. We've had a change in the Board of Commissioners, change in county management. So it's a good time, and the new commission right now, the commission right now is working on a new strategic plan. So I think we just keep moving forward on the comprehensive plan side of it to get those policies in place, to bring it to the board. And, the board ultimately is going to be the one who says yay or nay to whatever we recommend. So.
Doug?
I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but several of the comments here are very interesting, and I'd like to add briefly to those comments, but I don't have to do it right now.
Go ahead.
Well, my name's Doug Thompson, and today I'm wearing the hat of board member and vice president of LCPS, the Lower Columbia Preservation Society, and I can speak on behalf of the board without hesitation that Rachel Jensen makes us look good. So the most important thing any board can do is hire right. It's the most important decision we make. And so I take great pride in saying we made a great decision. She really is doing a great job of promoting historic preservation in our community. She didn't pay me to say any of this. I do want to respond to Robert Strickland. I've been a resident of Washington now for about a year and a half. I jumped the ditch after spending almost all my adult life in Astoria. And I'm living in, and I've been corrected enough, so I'm going to give you the authentic, the official pronunciation. It is Chinook, not Chinook. And at least that's what we tell. I want to respond to Jim. Jim, your experience with planting trees out at the fairgrounds really rings true, and that unfortunately is an all too common experience. And I can cite 3 quick examples of the same thing happening. The most prominent is the original landscaping, which was done by a wonderful landscape designer out of Cannon Beach, Beth Holland, and that was the Smith Point Roundabout. And ODOT paid a lot of money to have her design and install plantings out there, and within, I think, just a couple seasons, the ODOT crew, the riding mowers, turned it back into dandelions. The second example I'll give you quickly is the Hilltop Apartments. We had Beth Holland do a landscape design when I was involved in managing those years ago. And then we moved on, management changed, and bingo, dandelions. The third example is the U.S. Customs House reconstruction across from Safeway in ball fields in Upper Town. When I first got on the council, I was appointed to be the liaison to oversee that construction, authentic reconstruction. And again, Beth Holland and a wonderful site plan and wonderful plantings, and the City of Astoria crews within just several years. There are some remnant plants, and we are now going to be restoring those plantings. But in each case, I mean, the common thread is it takes a lot of volunteer effort and passion to do that work. But we all forget, how are we going to institutionalize the maintenance of these changes in the long term? And that's usually something that's almost always forgotten. I wanted to comment on Matt Bird's comments, and that is that it's that argument of, it really isn't black and white, private property rights versus some sort of communism. It's on a scale, and each community gets to decide where on that scale the regulations fall. Astoria now has, how many historic districts? 4. There are, I think, 7 inventories. And the other 3 are capable of being National Register districts. The city just does not put the effort into recommend. To have a city of 10,000 people and have 4 National Register historic districts and the potential for at least 3 more, it's just unheard of, and that's why this is the most historic city west of the Rockies, and certainly the most historic almost anywhere per capita. The point I'm making is that that combined with local regulations made Astoria look what it does today, how it does today. And what we all enjoy in downtown and the riverfront and all these homes, I just want you to remember, when it comes time to talk about private property rights versus regulations, the way this town looks and feels did not happen by accident. It's not because there was a special class of Astorians who just decided this is how we're going to do it by individual action. It was collective action, and it was a layer of regulation. To some, any regulation is, you understand where I'm going with this. Nowhere, when I was on the city council, one of the things we decided not to do, and most historic districts and most communities also don't go here, and that is to regulate such things as exterior paint colors. If your neighbor wants to paint their dwelling chartreuse, chances are they can do that. Williamsburg, historic Williamsburg, you can't do that. So there's all kinds of ways in between. But the bottom line is, if the county is going to preserve its history, there will have to be a level of regulation. And that's what we all get to decide is what would be appropriate. And there's going to be those who just don't want it. There's going to be others who are recognizing in the long run, historic preservation is economic development. It really does mean development. I'll shut up.
Are there other questions for Rachel? Ian, you had your hand up, I think.
Yeah, I was curious. I've seen a lot of agencies and organizations using citizen science, and I know you've said that right now we're overusing volunteers. But are there good examples of where you use a similar method? Like, for example, there are apps out there for documenting what bird you saw at a specific location, and then that data gets transmitted to a database where somebody in an organization is using it and cataloging it to support something eventual down the road. So is there a good example of how that could be used in inventories of historic assets?
I've yet to really find one or identify one that we would use here for that, but they are out there. They're definitely usable. And in terms of finding ways to get people to collaborate is excellent. I mean, that's something that, like I said, we need to go out into individual areas. So finding ways to communicate two-directionally with those people, have them understand what we're doing, why, and then also have them contribute information. That will be a process of its own that hopefully will be using some sort of digital.
So to add on to that, is there a certification for somebody?
Yeah, there are professional requirements, but a lot of the work, the actual survey work, can be done by interns or other people, but the main person compiling them generally has to be an architectural historian, a historian, an archaeologist. Like, there's a list of qualifications. Yeah, they have to have but they can employ or use volunteers. When I was in graduate school, I helped John Gutenberger. I volunteered and helped him inventory 400 properties in Upper Town, Astoria. So, there are students here. The community college has a historic preservation program. We can tap into that as a resource for sure. So we have enough interested people, enough interested organizations, I think, throughout the county that we do have a lot of people that we can, utilize. It's just going to be, getting that communication and then having people to collate all that. So.
And a lot of that is reaching out and finding, like when Jim Ulbert was researching Westport, if you go into the berry patch, there's an amazing resource of photographs hanging on the wall. And Jim, being not bashful, asked him, "Can I take these down and scan them?" And a lot of those are in the book. And how many photographs are out there in people's houses or barns or stores or other places? And there are these resources out there. And volunteers or professionals or a combination of both can go find them. And a lot of times it's just, I didn't know you were interested. It's us, whether it's Historical Society Preservation, the county, it's us showing an interest that I didn't know you wanted this. And most of the time they're more than willing they scan or tape permanently.
Mhm.
You have resources, scan photos.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and any documentation's better than, wait, you don't want to prevent people from documenting things because, oh, I don't have the right scanner and everything else. It's like people can take photos of photos with their phone and contribute those to our databases and stuff too. So I'd rather have a kind of out of focus photo of something that, no longer exists than not have anything at all, so.
So maybe we should instigate a historical drive and put it out in the public venue of either on the radio or into the media some way. We're asking for people to contribute and have it scanned. The technology now means that we're not taking it from them.
Mm-hmm.
We're merely taking a documentation and recording it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a great thing that we should be pursuing because it's a fairly cheap and cost-effective way to preserve history. People would like to say the people that own it die and the next generation doesn't care.
Yeah, we could have a mobile archive that travels through the county and says, hey, bring us your photos.
Right.
Any other questions for Rachel or for Max before he leaves? Going once, going twice? All right, thank you, Rachel. Okay, so as promised somewhat, Robert Olwin couldn't be here from the State Historic Preservation Office. He did send me his PowerPoint, which I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but there are a couple of slides that I really want to talk about and emphasize and go over those quickly. Okay. So before I start, I had said earlier that I really have a passion for historic preservation. I think it's very important. And just to kind of establish my street cred, before I came here, I used to work as a historic preservation planner at Taliesin, which is the Wisconsin home of Frank Lloyd Wright. And then in my position when I was in Florida, we were a certified local government, and so I was in charge of that program as well, and ran the Historic Preservation Commission, and also served on it at one point in between jobs with my city. So I just want to emphasize, for me, this is more personal than a lot of other parts of the comp plan. So certified local government is really what I wanted to have Robert highlight today. And so a lot of cities are certified local governments, and there are some counties in the state that are as well. Clatsop County is not one. Becoming a certified local government is a process, it's a paperwork process to begin. You fill out the form and basically say, I commit to doing these things, I being the county, the city, whichever government you're with. And it comes with some requirements, and I apologize because this is not my PowerPoint, so I'm kind of winging this here. So one thing that you would have to do is establish a preservation commission. When I was in Florida, we used to call it the Historic Demolition Commission because they never met a historic building that they didn't want to tear down, which was a shame. We would have to pass a preservation ordinance that spelled out what our responsibilities were, what the composition of the Preservation Commission would be. We agree that we're going to participate in an inventory process, and that when we get National Register nominations, that we review and comment on those as a county, and then also enforce the state historic preservation laws. So your first initial commitment to this process, if you decide and the county decides to become a certified local government, is pretty basic. It's setting up the ground rules and the foundation and the framework for anything more that you want to move forward with. And I don't remember, I think it was you, Doug, who talked about the paint police. So when you establish a historic preservation commission and you establish your ordinance, you have that ability to decide as a community how much regulation do you want to put upon yourselves. So, and I think it's important to stress that over and over and over, because as soon as people hear that term historic preservation, the first thing they think of is paint pollutants. And am I going to paint my house beige or taupe? And you laugh, but I have seen very long, lengthy discussions between planning commissions and historic preservation commissions where they got into that level of detail. It literally was the color blue or was it slate blue? And this was a big issue. So I don't think, want to go to that level, but then that's a community decision.
But then Tanner Beach already has. You got any design review board meeting in Tanner Beach, and they're down to that very to-that point.
And I think that depends on the community. And all of the cities and the county, the unincorporated areas are all very different. We have our unique characters. Within the unincorporated area, we have different communities that are unique. We've got Miles Crossing and Napa Swenson, and then we've got Westport, and we've got Hamlet, we've got Elsie and Jewel. Each one of them has a different flavor and different needs and different resources. So again, it's got to be a community decision. And there's nothing that says you can't have different regulations for different areas. So, if Joel wants to really, have a detailed ordinance and Napa says, yeah, we're just keep an eye on the big stuff, that's fine. All right, so if we did have a preservation commission, this would be their role. And a lot of it you'll see is education, identification, promotion. Again, kind of laying that framework and making sure that people understand the importance of historic preservation. And I think it's easy sometimes, especially when you've grown up somewhere or lived somewhere for a long time, I think it's easy to overlook the history sometimes, or the value of that history. And as someone who comes in from the outside, to me, the history is endlessly fascinating and is always new, and it's a constant voyage of discovery. And so that makes me perhaps more enthusiastic about it. But I think it's important to value and understand where we all come from, whether it's your history or somebody else's history. It's all part of our collective history. So, if we did decide to move forward and become a certified local government, there are benefits that come with it. It makes us eligible for grant funding. So funding some of those surveys and inventories, we would be eligible for that. We get help with preparing National Register nominations, disaster planning, which is probably very important. How do we make sure that our historic structures and resources will survive in the event of an earthquake, tsunami, as much as we can? Wildfires, which is becoming a bigger thing. And now climate change is impacting some of these historic resources as well. So beginning to look ahead and think about how do we continue to protect our history. And then there's grants for public education and for actual structure preservation itself. Training is always good, and then we get assistance from the Park Service and from the Historic Preservation Office. All right. I'm not going to go through the rest of this because I got these slides this morning. I really just wanted to press the certified local government aspect of it. And I personally would like to see come out of our comp plan update process a recommendation that the county does move forward with becoming a certified local government. I think that would be a good first step for the county to take. It would definitely amp up our preservation efforts, which have been very, very minimal to date, as far as I'm aware. So that's not spiel. So, yeah. I don't know if everybody has any questions, but, and unfortunately, again, Robert couldn't be here, but maybe a later time.
Can you give maybe several examples of rural Oregon counties that are CLGs relative to preservation?
I knew that at one time. I did not bring my materials. But I know there are some, and I want to say there are some coastal ones. I'd have to look.
Okay.
In the materials I did send out to the committee members, though, there is a list of certified local governments that is in there, along with some background information about what I just covered in these slides. I don't. I suspect it's just something that's never been a priority.
A number of years ago, in fact, half a lifetime ago, I was asked to put together a repair and certify the repair of the Reed property. And it was brought to me just a matter of 2 days prior to meeting a time frame for funding. There was no way that I could produce the document that they wanted in that period of time. What I'm looking for is the county's willingness to assist in that kind of a process in some manner that might even make funding available for a property owner that can afford to renovate or to keep from falling down a historic piece of property like the Reed property. I have no idea what condition it's in currently, but that was at least 15 years ago. So a great deal has had an opportunity to pass. Was there a question in there anywhere?
I was going to ask you that, but, so, to answer what I think you wanted to ask is, the county right now does not earmark funds towards building renovation or historic preservation activities as a separate line item in a budget. I don't know how the county board would look at a grant or loan program to private property owners to help with that. That's a discussion that the board would have to have. You know, the grant funding that would come with being a certified local government would typically apply to publicly owned buildings or some sort of partnership between the county and a private property owner. So there'd have to be some sort of joint venture. I don't think we can just use it as a pass-through to help.
Well, to follow up with that just a little bit, the funding that was being looked for was federal funding at the time. But the expense of putting that document together was beyond the funds available to the property. They couldn't do it. And you can't expect a small business like mine to take on a project like that and do it free of charge. And I'm just looking for the possibility of the county assisting in a property owner to achieve the federal funding. And that's something that could be written into the contract.
So we could put that as a recommendation that the county find ways to assist private property owners with the preservation and restoration of their property.
I would think that the CLG is, you know, is going to assist in that in terms of making aware, making us able to access state grants, that kind of thing. I mean, I sat on the Oregon Heritage Commission for 8 years, and I know a lot of projects came through. I even talked to staff there, and they said, hey, that's a great project. You know. It's too late this year, but put it in next year. And, you know, they're not always huge amounts, but it's enough to, you know, to move the project along. And so, to me, that's a really great step.
Obviously, we have knowledge available in groups, but having a central county that could at least assist in getting that information out to homeowners or property owners that are looking for that assistance would be a very worthwhile use of that knowledge.
That's why I think we should push for a certified local government.
Absolutely.
And that's down at the top of the list.
quick follow-up question. Given your broad experience with CLGs, are you aware of any local government that has ever been decertified by the state, SHPO as a CLG?
Not to my knowledge, I'm sure it's probably happening. I know, in my experience is Florida-based, so keep that in mind, but it's basically the same program nationwide. Is that you could be decertified if you didn't fill out your annual report every year, and if you were inactive, if you disbanded your Historic Preservation Commission, you could be removed as a certified local government. I personally don't know off the top of my head of a government that happened to, but it does happen.
Thank you.
In your experience, what would be the two big takeaways? Why would you do this?
I think it helps us get grant funding to do some of the programs if we decide as a community that we have an interest in this. First of all, I guess that's the first thing, that we have an interest in preserving our historic resources. If we make that commitment, then I think that helps us. It gives us the grant funding, it gives us some expertise, technical expertise that we can draw on, that we don't, not that we don't have at a broad county level, but that we don't have at staff level, per se, we're trying to work on. Historic National Register nominations are a huge process. It takes a lot of work to complete one of those. So, for example, having help in preparing some of that would be just wonderful.
Do we need to have a majority of the citizens involved in this study? I mean, I found most of these things happen due to people with foresight and the ingenuity and energy to initiate and push these things through. And so long as you've got a very focused group, I don't think it has to be the majority of the community to benefit the community. That's what volunteerism is all about. You get a small group of individuals who have the foresight, the ability to project is important. And I think that so long as you've got that, you wouldn't have to have overall community support. Personally, I think that you just need to have the focus groups that are willing to pursue it and push it forward.
Well, you definitely need proponents, but you can't have a group of proponents from my viewpoint that is trying to force something on a population that's resistant to it.
Right.
So if we've learned nothing from Goal 4 and Forest Practices Act, that's our takeaway from that. Is you have to have some sort of agreement and discussion. And obviously, I don't think historic preservation is quite as controversial as changes to the Forest Practices Act, but it's definitely something you have to have because as we talked about this morning, there's a lot of private property rights involved in this. And, it is very different from walking the streets of Astoria and doing your photo inventory, which is really a lot easier than trying to get out to Hamlet or some of these areas which are removed. And then not only once you get to the property after an hour drive, you've got to get back in and drive maybe a mile or more back into a property to find your way.
So it's all in when you pose the question. You ask whether people are opposed to it or if they are advocates for it. And I think that it's all in how you approach the matter with the question as to whether you get the support or not.
There's a lot of education that needs to get done so that people understand why you're even asking the question.
Right.
So, and I don't know that we've done enough of that education work right now. Just planning.
Right.
All right. Any other questions for me at this point? Okay. So I just want to go over the handouts, just so everyone knows. And again, if you know people who wanted to be here today but couldn't, we have extra handouts, so please take some. Help yourself to food. We have the notes, not notes, but the slides from the state SHPO presentation, which will be posted on the county's website. We also sent in this brochure about disaster preparedness and their historic structures, so that's an important resource. We've got a copy of Matt Burns' list of potential historic resources that we should consider for protection, so be sure to take one of those. to, and I will. We're going to actually do this as a quarter-page ad in the paper, and then we're also working on a postcard to send out to all the property owners in the unincorporated areas. And so our goal is to do this on a quarterly basis, do the mailing, do the newspaper ad, hopefully get the word out to a bigger group of people about what's happening. And then, depending on how life plays out, we have a workshop scheduled on April 3rd to deal with watersheds and scenic and open spaces. And this includes representatives from the North Coast Land Conservancy, the Watershed Alliance, and CREST. Again, this is all, we're planning